Imagine searching for your kidnapped daughter for 7 years. Everyone tells you to move on, to accept she's gone forever. But one random day in traffic, a barefoot girl selling water walks up to your window. And she has your daughter's eyes. What would you do if the child, the world buried, suddenly looked right at you? That was 7 years ago. 7 years since the school bell rang and she walked out into the afternoon heat, her pink backpack bouncing against her shoulders, her cornrows freshly done the night before. 7 years since the driver he trusted, the man who had worked for his family for a decade, pulled up in the black Mercedes and opened the door for her. 7 years since she climbed inside, waved at her classmates, and disappeared into Lagos traffic like smoke dissolving into thick, humid air. If you believe a father's love never dies, comment yes below and stay with this story to the very end. The ransom call came at midnight. A voice distorted through cheap electronics demanded 20 million naira. Kelechi didn't hesitate. He didn't negotiate. He gathered the money in 2 duffel bags, his hands shaking so violently that his security chief had to zip them closed. The exchange location changed 3 times. First a bridge, then an abandoned warehouse in Ajegunle. Finally, a dirt road near the Badagry Expressway where streetlights died and darkness swallowed everything. He went alone despite every warning. He parked where they instructed. He placed the bags on the ground. He stepped back with his hands raised, his throat raw from shouting into the night that he just wanted his daughter back, that they could have everything, his business, his properties, his life, just bring back his little girl. The bags vanished. Muna did not appear. He waited until dawn, collapsing to his knees in the red dust, his expensive agbada soaking up dew and dirt. When the sun rose, he was still there, staring at the empty road, unable to accept that he had been deceived. His phone rang with unknown numbers throughout the day. Some were journalists, others were scammers pretending to have information. One was a detective from the Nigerian police force who spoke with the tired resignation of someone who had seen this story end badly too many times. The investigation became a circus. Officers trampled through his home asking questions that felt like accusations. Where was he the night before the kidnapping? Did he have enemies? Had he recently fired any staff? What was his relationship with his new wife? The questions twisted inside him like knives because he knew what they implied. Rich man stages kidnapping of his own child for insurance money. Rich man eliminates inconvenient daughter from previous marriage. Rich man caught in scandal. The media devoured it. Paparazzi camped outside his gates. Headlines screamed theories. Photos of him leaving the police station were edited to make him look sinister, guilty, broken. His business partners called emergency meetings, suggesting he step down temporarily until the matter was resolved, their voices slick with false sympathy. His new wife, Ada, moved through the house like a ghost, beautiful and distant, her designer clothes and perfect makeup somehow obscene, in a home drowning in grief. Weeks became months. The police produced leads that went nowhere. A witness claimed to have seen Muna in a bus heading to Benin. Another swore she was spotted in a church in Abuja. Kelechi chased every shadow, every rumor, every desperate hope. He hired private investigators who drained his bank accounts and delivered nothing but expensive reports filled with dead ends. He met with powerful men in dark rooms, men whose handshakes felt like devil's bargains, men who promised results if he looked the other way on certain matters. He paid, he begged, he threatened, he wept. Then came the day that nearly destroyed him completely. A fisherman found a pair of children's sandals near the riverbank in EP, pink sandals with butterflies on the straps. Muna's sandals. The police called a press conference before even contacting him. He learned his daughter was presumed dead by watching the news in his own living room, his whiskey glass falling from his hand and shattering across Italian tile. The city accepted her death. The police closed the case. Newspapers published obituaries. Ada arranged a funeral, a massive affair with white roses and a tiny empty casket. She did this without asking him, presenting it as inevitable and necessary for closure. When he refused to attend, the family erupted. His mother called him mad with grief. His brothers accused him of disrespecting Muna's memory. Ada stood in the doorway of his study, her arms crossed, her voice sharp as broken glass, telling him he needed to move on, that he was embarrassing himself, that he was embarrassing her. He threw them all out. He stood at his gate and watched the funeral procession leave without him, the hearse carrying an empty box toward a grave that would hold only lies. Years dripped past like blood from an open wound. His empire continued to grow because money has no conscience, and business cares nothing for broken hearts. He sat through board meetings like a mannequin, signing documents he didn't read, approving deals he didn't understand. His reflection in the mirror aged rapidly. Gray threaded through his hair, lines carved deep around his eyes. He lost weight, then gained it back, then lost it again. Ada suggested adoption. She said it gently at first, during a quiet dinner on their anniversary, her hand covering his across the table. A child would bring life back into the house, she whispered. A child would help him heal. When he didn't respond, she grew bolder. She brought home brochures from orphanages. She invited friends with adopted children to elaborate lunches, orchestrating conversations designed to change his mind. He realized with cold clarity that she wanted him to forget, that to her, Muna was a problem solved by replacement, that his wife saw his grief not as love, but as inconvenience. Their marriage became a performance. They attended charity galas together, smiling for cameras, dancing briefly before retreating to opposite corners. At home, they existed in different wings of the mansion, crossing paths only when necessary. She filled her days with shopping and spa appointments and long lunches with friends who whispered behind their wine glasses. He filled his with searching. He never stopped searching. Every morning he reviewed reports from private investigators he kept on retainer. Every evening he studied maps of Lagos, marking locations where children had been recovered, looking for patterns in the chaos. His study walls became covered with photographs, news clippings, handwritten notes connected by red string like the detective board of a madman. His staff learned not to disturb him when they heard him in there late at night, talking to Muna's picture, promising her he was still looking. The therapist his mother forced him to see called it complicated grief. She explained that without a body, without certainty, the mind couldn't process loss properly. She recommended medications with names he couldn't pronounce. He took them for a week, felt nothing change, and threw the bottles away. How could chemicals fix a father's broken heart? How could pills bring back a daughter's laughter? On the 7th anniversary of her disappearance, he woke feeling older than his 48 years. The date circled in red on every calendar, impossible to ignore. Ada had left the house early, unable to tolerate his mood on this day. The staff moved quietly, avoiding eye contact. The morning stretched before him, empty and terrible. He decided to visit the market district, a decision made without thought, driven by restless desperation. One of his investigators had mentioned a woman there who sometimes had information about street children. It was a thin lead, gossamer fragile, but he clung to it because clinging was all he knew how to do anymore. His driver navigated through Lagos traffic, the kind of suffocating gridlock that turns the city into a parking lot under brutal sun. Hawkers weaved between vehicles selling everything imaginable: phone chargers, plantain chips, pirated DVDs, cold pure water in plastic sachets. Kelechi stared through tinted windows at the chaos, seeing nothing, his mind locked in the past. The market overwhelmed the senses. Thousands of people compressed into narrow walkways between wooden stalls. The smell of dried fish mixed with perfume, mixed with open sewage. Voices shouted prices and bargained in Yoruba, Igbo, pidgin English, creating a symphony of commerce and survival. He pushed through the crowd, his expensive watch and designer shoes marking him as prey for pickpockets and scam artists. He found the woman his investigator mentioned, an elderly vendor selling fabrics, her face mapped with wrinkles and wisdom. She remembered him from previous visits. She gestured for him to sit on an overturned crate, offered him a bottle of Coke that was somehow still cold, and spoke in a low voice that forced him to lean close. She had heard things, whispers about a girl, a thin girl who sold pure water near the mechanic workshops in Mushin, a girl who never smiled, who flinched when adults spoke too loudly, who disappeared when police or social workers came around. The woman couldn't be certain, she warned. Street children all started to look similar after hunger carved away their individuality. But this girl had unusual eyes, she said, very bright, almost golden in certain light. Muna had eyes like that, eyes that reminded him of her mother, his first wife who died giving birth, who left him with a daughter that became his entire world. He pressed money into the fabric seller's hand, far too much, and rushed back to his car. His driver knew Mushin well. The dense neighborhood where mechanics worked on vehicles in open-air garages and welders sent sparks flying into the afternoon heat. They drove there immediately, Kelechi's heart hammering against his ribs, hope and terror dancing together in his chest. They found nothing. He walked for hours, asking questions, showing old photographs on his phone. Mechanics glanced at the picture and shrugged. Street food vendors shook their heads. Children scattered when he approached, trained to distrust well-dressed strangers. As the sun began to set, painting the sky orange and purple, he admitted defeat and returned to the car, his legs heavy, his soul heavier. But something had shifted. The fabric seller's words echoed in his mind. He instructed his investigator to focus on Mushin, to ask more questions, to watch the mechanic workshops, to find the girl with golden eyes. 3 weeks passed with no results. Then a month. Kelechi felt the familiar darkness closing in, the weight of another false hope collapsing under its own impossibility. He considered firing the investigator, closing this final chapter of his search, accepting what everyone else had accepted 7 years ago. Then came a Wednesday morning he would remember forever. Traffic forced his driver to take an alternate route through a part of the city Kelechi rarely saw. Not the slums exactly, but not far from them. A neighborhood where buildings leaned against each other for support, where laundry hung from every balcony, where generators roared because electricity was a rumor. His car crawled through gridlock, trapped behind a broken-down Danfo bus that blocked the entire road. Kelechi stared out the window without really seeing, his mind elsewhere, as always, when movement caught his attention. A small figure darted between vehicles, carrying a bucket balanced on her head. A girl, maybe 12 or 13, barefoot despite the scorching asphalt, wearing a faded dress that might have once been yellow, but had surrendered to gray. If you feel your heart racing right now, comment "Save her" and keep watching, because what happens next will change everything. She moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this countless times. She stopped at car windows, holding up plastic sachets of pure water, her voice thin as she called out prices. Most drivers waved her away. A few bought water just to be kind, or to get rid of her. She collected coins in a small bag tied to her waist, never looking up, never making eye contact. Then she turned toward his car. Time fractured into slow motion. Kelechi saw her face through the tinted glass. Thin face, too thin, malnutrition written in the hollows beneath her eyes and the sharp angle of her cheekbones. Dirt smudged her forehead. Her hair, uncombed and dusty, fell past her shoulders in tangles that needed a mother's patient hands. But her eyes, those eyes, golden brown in the afternoon light, shaped like teardrops, impossible to forget because they were his first wife's eyes, transplanted perfectly into his daughter's face. His breath stopped. His vision tunneled. The world reduced to that face. That impossible, miraculous face pressed close to his window, trying to see through the tint to the customer inside. 7 years of searching. 7 years of false leads and shattered hopes and midnight prayers, and she was here, barefoot and starving, selling water to survive 3 kilometers from his mansion. He couldn't move. His body had forgotten how to function. His driver asked if he wanted water, his voice coming from very far away. Kelechi tried to speak and produced only a choking sound. He fumbled with the door handle, his hands trembling violently. The girl stepped back, nervous. Rich men in expensive cars made her cautious. She was already turning away when he finally managed to open the door and stumble out. She froze. They stared at each other across the hood of the Mercedes, the traffic chaos continuing around them, horns blaring, engines rumbling, people shouting, but in the space between them existed only terrible silence. He saw recognition flicker across her face, then vanish, replaced by confusion and fear. She dropped her bucket. Plastic sachets scattered across the ground. She took a step backward, then another, her eyes wide, her breathing rapid. Kelechi tried to say her name, and couldn't. His throat had closed. Tears poured down his face, unbidden, uncontrollable. He took a step toward her, and she ran. She ran like a rabbit who had learned that predators wore human faces, darting between cars with desperate speed. He chased her, screaming her name now, not caring who heard or who watched. His driver shouted behind him. People scattered. A mad rich man was running through traffic, weeping, calling for a girl who ran from him as if he were death itself. Paigu. She was fast, but he was determined. She cut through an alley between buildings, leaping over garbage piles and open sewers. He followed, his expensive shoes slipping on filth, his suit jacket tearing on corrugated metal. She glanced back, and he saw raw terror in her face, the look of prey who knew capture meant destruction. She led him deeper into the slum, through passages so narrow his shoulders brushed both walls, past shacks built from wood scraps and rusty zinc, past cooking fires and sleeping dogs, and people who watched the chase with mild interest. Finally, she burst through a doorway into a space barely large enough to be called a room. An old woman sat on a mat on the floor, so thin she looked like a skeleton wearing skin. The girl collapsed beside her, gasping for air, pressing herself against the wall. The old woman looked up at Kelechi standing in the doorway, blocking the light, and said in Yoruba, "What do you want with my child?" The word gutted him. My child. This dying woman on the floor called his daughter her child. He stepped inside. The room contained almost nothing. A mat for sleeping, a plastic bucket for water, a kerosene lamp, 3 plastic plates stacked in the corner. The heat was suffocating, trapped by the zinc roof, turning the space into an oven. The girl was hyperventilating now, her chest heaving, her eyes rolling white with panic. Kelechi knelt slowly, carefully, holding his hands up to show he meant no harm. He spoke in Igbo, the language he used to use when tucking her into bed, when teaching her prayers, when telling her stories about her mother. He said, "Muna, I've been looking for you. I never stopped looking for you." She shook her head violently, pressing harder against the wall as if she could push through it and disappear. The old woman tried to sit up straighter, her protective instinct stronger than her dying body. She told him to leave, that he was frightening the girl, that whatever he wanted wasn't here. Kelechi pulled out his phone with shaking hands. He scrolled through photos, hundreds of photos, all of Muna before the kidnapping. He held the phone toward her, showing her images of herself. Birthday parties, beach vacations, Christmas mornings. A little girl in beautiful dresses and bright ribbons, smiling with all the confidence of a child who knew she was loved. "This is you," he whispered. "This is who you are. I'm your father, your papa. I've been searching for 7 years. She stared at the photos. Her face crumpled. Tears fell silently down her cheeks, cutting clean paths through the dust. She looked at the old woman, then back at the photos, then at Kelechi's face, searching for truth in features she barely remembered. The old woman began coughing, a wet, rattling sound that bent her double. The girl forgot her fear immediately, turning to support the woman, wiping her mouth with the edge of her dress, whispering comfort. Kelechi saw the cough produce blood, dark red against the woman's palm. He stood and pulled out his wallet, extracting every naira note inside. He held the money toward the old woman, his voice breaking. "Let me take her to the hospital, both of you. Let me help." The woman looked at the money with the defeated expression of someone who knew it was too late for her. She looked at the girl with infinite sadness and said, "Go with him, Muna. He is your father." "I always knew someone would come for you." The girl's eyes went wide. "You knew?" "I suspected. You were too well-spoken for the streets, too educated, and your eyes, nobody has eyes like that." The woman coughed again, weaker this time. "I kept you safe as long as I could. Now go." The girl looked between them, trapped between two worlds, two truths, two different lives. Then she swayed on her feet, her face going gray. Kelechi caught her as she collapsed, her body far too light, nothing but bones and will. She had fainted from hunger, from shock, from 7 years of surviving on scraps and terror. He carried her to the car, the old woman shuffling behind them, refusing to be left alone. His driver had called ahead to the hospital. They sped through traffic, Kelechi holding Muna in his arms, her head against his chest. Feeling her heartbeat flutter like a bird's, she woke briefly and tried to pull away, but was too weak. She whispered, "Where are you taking me?" "Home," he said. "I'm taking you home." The hospital moved with the efficiency money commands. Doctors swarmed. IV lines were inserted. Blood was drawn for testing. The old woman was placed in a separate room, her prognosis grim, but at least she would die in comfort. Kelechi sat beside Muna's bed while she slept, watching monitors beep and machines hum, unable to look away for even a second, as if she might disappear again if he closed his eyes. A doctor approached with a clipboard and a gentle voice. They had questions for consent to treat. They needed guardian information. They wanted to run a DNA test to confirm identity because this situation was unusual and legally complicated. Kelechi agreed to everything, signed everything, donated blood for comparison. The wait for results felt longer than 7 years. He sat in a private consultation room, staring at sterile white walls, his entire future balanced on laboratory precision. A nurse brought him tea he didn't drink. Security guards posted outside the room because word had spread through the hospital about who he was and what might have happened. The doctor returned with the test results in a folder. She sat across from him and opened it slowly, her expression carefully neutral. She said, "Mr. Kelechi, the DNA test confirms with 99.9% certainty that the girl admitted today is your biological daughter." He had known. His heart had known the moment he saw her face. But hearing it confirmed by science, by irrefutable proof, shattered something inside him. He bent forward, his face in his hands, and sobbed with an abandon that frightened the doctor. 7 years of grief poured out in that sterile room. 7 years of hope deferred, and dreams destroyed, and prayers that felt like they disappeared into an uncaring universe. She was alive. His daughter was alive. When he finally composed himself, he asked the question that had been building since the chase through the slum. How did she survive? Where has she been? The doctor shook her head. She's severely malnourished, dehydrated, and traumatized. She has scars consistent with physical abuse. Psychologically, she paused, choosing words carefully. It will take time. She doesn't trust easily. She hoards food. She's terrified of men. Whatever she experienced, it broke something inside her that will require patience and professional help to repair. "I don't care how long it takes," Kelechi said. "She's home now. She's safe." But as he returned to her room and sat beside her bed, watching her sleep fitfully, twitching and whimpering, even in unconsciousness, he realized coming home was just the beginning. The real battle would be convincing her that home was safe. She woke as the sun was setting, painting the hospital room in orange light. She looked at the IV in her arm, the clean sheets, the monitoring equipment, and panic flooded her face. She tried to rip the IV out. Kelechi gently restrained her hands, speaking softly, promising she was safe, that nobody would hurt her. "Where is Mama Titi?" she demanded, her voice hoarse. "The old woman? She's here, in another room. Doctors are caring for her." He paused. "Who is she to you?" Muna stared at him with those golden eyes, so much older now than eyes should be at 13. "She found me when they threw me away. She kept me alive." "Who threw you away?" She turned her face to the wall, refusing to answer. He didn't push. The doctors had warned him about this. Trauma victims revealed truth in their own time, in fragments and pieces, when they felt safe enough to remember. Over the next few days, as her body recovered from malnutrition and dehydration, small details emerged. Not in order, not always making sense. But slowly, a terrible picture formed. After the kidnapping, she had been held in a dark room for months. She never saw her captors' faces clearly. They fed her little, spoke rarely, moved her from place to place, hidden in boxes and bags. She remembered begging to go home, screaming until her voice broke, then finally going silent as she learned that noise brought punishment. Then one night, they had driven her far from the city and abandoned her near a garbage dump in a small village where nobody knew her name or cared. She was 7 years old and alone and terrified. She wandered for days, eating scraps, sleeping in doorways, until Mama Titi found her collapsed near a church. The old woman had lost her own children to disease years before. She was living on the edge of death herself, supporting herself by begging and selling water. But she took Muna in, fed her what little she had, protected her from the predators who hunted street children. And when Mama Titi became too sick to work, Muna took over selling water, becoming the provider, repaying kindness with desperate loyalty. For 7 years, they had survived together, invisible among thousands of other forgotten people in Lagos's sprawling, informal settlements. Muna had forgotten most of her old life. She remembered fragments: a big house, a man who called her princess, a driver with kind eyes who turned into a monster. But the memories felt like dreams, unreliable and distant. She had learned to be Mama Titi's child, to expect nothing, to survive each day without thinking about tomorrow. And now this man appeared, claiming to be her father, showing her photos of a life she couldn't trust was real. The police became involved. Kelechi had to notify them when the DNA test confirmed identity. Detectives arrived with questions. Muna shut down completely, refusing to speak, staring at the wall with empty eyes. Kelechi threw them out of the room, his voice rising to a roar, demanding they leave his daughter alone until she was ready. But he needed to know the truth. Who had done this? How had they kept her hidden for 7 years? The answer came from Mama Titi in her final days. Cancer had spread through her body, too far gone for treatment to matter. She lay in her hospital bed, oxygen tubes in her nose, and told Kelechi everything while Muna slept down the hall. She had suspected from the beginning that Muna's kidnapping was inside work. The girl was too clean, too well fed initially, too clearly from money. The abandonment near the village wasn't random. It was calculated. Somewhere nobody would look for a Lagos billionaire's daughter. Mama Titi had kept quiet because she feared whoever had done this would come back to finish the job. She had protected Muna by hiding her in plain sight among the thousands of street children nobody noticed. She had loved her because love cost nothing, and because this broken child needed someone to hold her while she cried for a home she barely remembered. "Find who did this," Mama Titi whispered, her voice weak. "Promise me you will find them and make them pay." Kelechi promised. He held the old woman's hand as she died 2 days later, peaceful finally, her duty done. Muna wept beside the bed, her body shaking with sobs that sounded like they were being ripped from her soul. Kelechi wanted to hold her, but she wouldn't let him. She pulled away from his touch, still unable to trust, still believing somehow that men who claimed to love you were lying. He arranged Mama Titi's funeral personally. A proper burial with flowers and hymns and a headstone that called her a hero. Muna stood beside him in a black dress he had bought, her hand gripping his arm for the first time, held up by his strength because her own had finally run out. After the funeral, the investigation intensified. Kelechi's private investigators worked with police detectives who actually cared, now that they knew the girl was alive, and this was a real case with real criminals to catch. They started with the obvious suspects. The driver who had disappeared 7 years ago. His bank records showed a large deposit the week after the kidnapping. His phone records revealed calls to a number registered to someone surprising, Ada's personal assistant. The investigators dug deeper. They found text messages between Ada and the driver, deleted but recovered from cell tower records. Messages planning the kidnapping, messages about disposal, messages celebrating Muna's presumed death and discussing Ada's new control over Kelechi's wealth. The motive was obscenely simple. Ada wanted sole inheritance rights for any children she might have. Muna, the daughter from the first marriage, was an obstacle. So Ada had orchestrated her removal, paying the driver a fraction of what she stood to gain. The driver had abandoned Muna in that remote village, assuming she would die, that a 7-year-old alone couldn't possibly survive. He had been wrong. Mama Titi's kindness had been the variable they hadn't anticipated. If your heart is breaking for what this family endured, but you believe in justice and healing, comment, "Hope wins" right now, and make sure you're subscribed to see how this journey ends. Kelechi listened to the investigator's report in his study, that room covered in 7 years of desperate searching. He felt no satisfaction, only cold rage that someone he had trusted, someone he had married and brought into his home, had stolen his daughter and left her to die. Ada was arrested at a charity luncheon, surrounded by her wealthy friends, wearing jewelry that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. The video of police handcuffing her in her designer dress went viral. The media, who had once questioned Kelechi's innocence, now dissected Ada's deception. The business partners who had pressured him to move on suddenly issued statements of support. Everyone loved to be on the winning side of a story. The driver was found in Abuja, living under a false name. He confessed everything immediately, hoping for a reduced sentence. His testimony sealed Ada's fate. Kidnapping, attempted murder of a minor, fraud, conspiracy. The charges stacked like blocks building a tower of justice 7 years delayed. Kelechi didn't attend the trial. He had more important work, rebuilding his daughter's trust. Muna came home to a mansion that felt like a museum of someone else's life. She wandered through rooms that should have been familiar but felt foreign. Her old bedroom had been preserved exactly as it was. Posters on the walls, toys on shelves, clothes in the closet. Ada had wanted to redecorate it, he remembered now with bitter clarity, but he had refused. Now Muna stood in the doorway staring at this shrine to her childhood, unable to enter. She slept on the floor of her bedroom that first night, unable to trust the soft bed. She hoarded food in her pillowcase, unable to believe meals would keep coming. She flinched when he raised his voice even slightly, unable to forget that men's anger meant pain. The therapist specializing in childhood trauma visited 3 times a week. She explained that Muna's brain had rewired itself for survival. She had learned that adults betrayed you, that comfort was temporary, that trusting anyone led to abandonment. Unlearning those lessons would take years. Kelechi devoted himself entirely to her recovery. He canceled business meetings. He worked from home. He learned to speak softly, move slowly, give her space while making it clear he would never leave. He sat outside her bedroom door on nights when she woke screaming, talking to her through the wood until her breathing calmed. Slowly, microscopically slowly, progress happened. She started eating at the table instead of taking food to hide. She let him read to her at bedtime from books she used to love. She asked about her mother, the first wife she had no memories of, and he showed her photos and told her stories until they both cried. She started calling him by his name. Then one evening, 6 months after he found her, she was showing him a drawing she had made in therapy, and casually, as if it was nothing, she said, "Papa, do you think this is good?" Papa. The word hung in the air between them, fragile and precious. She looked up and saw his tears and panicked, thinking she had done something wrong. He pulled her into his arms for the first time since bringing her home, and she let him, and they held each other while he whispered that he loved her, had always loved her, would never stop loving her. Recovery wasn't linear. There were setbacks and bad days and weeks where she retreated back into silence. But gradually, she began to live again instead of just survive. She went back to school with tutors at first, then eventually a small private academy. She made friends cautiously, learning to trust carefully. She discovered she loved art and filled sketchbooks with drawings of street scenes, birds, faces of children she remembered from her years selling water. On the 2nd anniversary of finding her, Muna told him she wanted to help other children. Kids who were still lost, kids who were selling water barefoot, kids who needed someone to stop and see them. Kelechi had been thinking the same thing. His wealth had protected nothing when it mattered most, but now it could be wielded with purpose. He established a foundation in Mama Titi's name dedicated to finding missing children and supporting street kids. He built shelters across Lagos where children could get meals, medical care, education, and protection without judgment or police involvement. Muna became the face of the foundation as she grew older. She spoke at events, her voice steady now, telling her story to rooms full of wealthy donors. She visited shelters and sat with traumatized children, her presence alone proving that survival was possible. She was living evidence that the lost could be found, that the broken could heal, that even 7 years of darkness couldn't extinguish hope. On her 18th birthday, Kelechi took her to Mama Titi's grave. They brought flowers and spent the afternoon telling the headstone about everything the foundation had accomplished. Hundreds of children found, thousands more given safety and support, all because one dying woman had chosen kindness when she could have walked past a collapsed child near a church. Muna pressed her hand against the stone and whispered, "Thank you for keeping me alive long enough to come home." That evening, they hosted a fundraiser at the mansion. Politicians and business leaders and celebrities filled the house with laughter and music and speeches about change. But Kelechi's favorite moment came late, when most guests had left, when he found Muna standing on the balcony looking out over Lagos's lights. She said, "Do you ever think about how different it could have been if traffic hadn't diverted you that day? If you had looked away 1 second earlier?" He joined her at the railing, their shoulders touching. "I think about how many children are still out there right now, selling water, sleeping in doorways, waiting for someone to stop and see them. We'll find them," she said, with the certainty of someone who knew what being found felt like. "As many as we can, for as long as it takes." He looked at his daughter, no longer the terrified girl who ran from him in traffic, no longer the malnourished child who hoarded food, but a young woman with purpose and fire and compassion forged in the crucible of suffering. She had transformed her pain into power, her survival into service. The foundation expanded beyond Lagos. They partnered with international organizations. They developed new technologies to match missing children with their families. They trained social workers and funded investigators and lobbied for better laws protecting vulnerable children. Years after that Wednesday, when traffic changed everything, Muna stood in one of the foundation's shelters, speaking to a room full of children recently rescued from the streets. They sat in a circle on clean mats, wearing new clothes, their bellies full perhaps for the first time in months or years. They looked at her with the same haunted eyes she had once seen in her reflection. She told them her story, not sparing details, not sugarcoating the hunger or fear or years of wondering if she would ever stop selling water. She showed them the scars on her feet from walking barefoot on hot asphalt. She told them about Mama Titi and about the father who never stopped searching and about the long road from broken to whole. "I used to sell water on these same streets," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room, "until someone stopped for me, until someone saw me. And now we see you, all of you, and we won't stop looking until every missing child comes home." The children listened with the intensity of those hearing their own story reflected back. Some cried, others sat stone-faced, not yet ready to believe in rescue. But all of them heard the message underneath her words, that they mattered, that they were not forgotten, that someone was willing to fight for them the way someone had fought for her. After the talk, a small girl approached Muna hesitantly. She was maybe 8 years old, tiny for her age, holding a tattered stuffed animal. She looked up at Muna and whispered, "Did it hurt when you had to trust your papa again?" Muna knelt to meet her eyes. "Yes, it hurt terribly, because trusting means risking being hurt again. But you know what hurt more? Living without love. Living without believing anyone could be good. How did you know he was really your papa?" "Time," Muna said simply. "He proved it every single day. With patience, with kindness, with staying when I pushed him away. Love isn't just words. It's showing up. Every day. Until you believe it." The girl hugged her suddenly, desperately. Muna held her while she cried. This child, who was her mirror, her echo, her reminder of why the work mattered. Kalichi watched from the doorway, his heart full. He thought about the 7 years of searching, the countless false leads, the nights he wanted to give up but couldn't because fathers don't abandon their children even when everyone says those children are gone. He thought about how close he came to never finding her. One different route, one moment of looking away, one instant of not recognizing those golden eyes. He thought about Mama Titi, dying in a hospital bed, her final act ensuring Muna understood who her father was, about how kindness ripples forward in ways we never see, about how one woman's choice to help a collapsed child created a foundation that would save thousands. As the sun set over Lagos, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold, Muna joined him at the doorway. They watched the children being served dinner, laughing now, some of the tension leaving their small bodies as they realized this place was safe. "I want to build 10 more shelters next year," Muna said. "And I want to start a program training street kids in trades so they have options besides begging or crime." "Then we'll do it," Kelechi said. "Whatever it takes." She leaned against him, this daughter he lost and found, this miracle forged in suffering. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "Never," he said, his voice thick with emotion. A father's love doesn't have an expiration date. It doesn't fade with time or distance. It endures. Always. They stood together as the evening deepened, watching over children who were learning what it meant to be seen, to be valued, to be loved. The journey from that Wednesday in traffic to this moment had been agonizing and beautiful and transformative. It had broken them both and rebuilt them stronger. Somewhere in the city, another child was selling water barefoot, waiting to be found. Another parent was searching desperately, refusing to believe their child was gone. Another stranger with a kind heart might choose to stop and help instead of looking away. And because of what Muna and Kelechi had survived and built together, those searches had better chances of ending in reunion instead of grief. Those children had more shelters to run to. Those families had more resources to help them find their way back to each other. This was their legacy, not the wealth he had accumulated, not the empire he had built, but the lives they saved, the hope they kindled, the proof they offered that even in a city of millions where children disappeared into poverty and trauma, love could endure, families could heal, and the lost could be found. Muna squeezed his hand, and together they walked into the shelter to join the children for dinner, to share their evening meal, to offer their presence as testament that happy endings were possible even after 7 years of darkness. Because sometimes traffic jams are answered prayers. Sometimes the detours life forces you to take lead you exactly where you needed to be. Sometimes the moment you want to give up is the moment before everything changes. And sometimes a father's love is strong enough to search for 7 years and recognize his daughter's eyes through the window of a car on a random Wednesday afternoon, in a city of 20 million people, against impossible odds. That kind of love doesn't just find what was lost. It transforms pain into purpose. It turns victims into heroes. It builds foundations that change futures for thousands. It wins. If you watched until the end, comment, "Hope wins." Let me see the real ones who believe every missing child deserves to come home.